milk bars flies, just looking for a new kind of midge larva to use in lakes. And if I remember correctly, I think the story went I don't remember if it was when he was growing up in Seattle area or what, and was fishing this little still water with a older guy, and the guy just kept catching fish after fish with it. And John finally worked up the nerve to go and talk to this guy and figure out what was working. And the guy handed him a pattern that was real similar to this. So he went and lost all of the fish using the pattern. So he went home and tied some more of them. And he does it with just or I'm not sure what material he used back then, but now he does it with just the clear stretch tubing with nothing in it. And you can use any color thread you want, because that's what's going to show up through the base. And so I like to do it with the red, and either a root beer colored or a gold colored crystal flash through the tube. That's what works best up on the Logan. So on this one, I start my thread right behind the hook eye, and then I start the tube in the front and bind it down, and then if you pull it and keep it stretched tight, it'll thin out as you tie. So I'll just tie it down right to the back of the hook and then let go of the tube, and it just stretches back to its normal self. So what I'm going to do is throw a couple half hitches on the front there, and then I'm going to use the rotary on my vise and take that tubing and kind of hold it straight up and keep it a little tight so it thins out. And then just wrap it right up the body. Just one turn right right in front of the last. You don't have to overlap them or anything like that. Now you can do this hand over hand, and you just got to make sure you keep it pulled tight when you do it. So we'll come up about a eye length back and tie it off. And I always take that tube and pull it tight when you cut it off, and that way you don't have a little nub right on the front of it. Now let's build up a little bit of a thread head. You can do this with a different color thread for the head if you want, like a brown head or a black head or whatever, but I usually just use the same thread right across it, and then just whip finish it. And that's the whole pattern. The original pattern in his book calls to coat it with like head cement or Sally Hansen's. I've been using a little bit of UV fly finish too if I don't have any Sally Hansen's, but it's just to coat the threads and help protect it. That's the whole fly. So I'll show you how I put the flash through the tubing here so you guys can be able to see it. Let me grab another one out here and I'll show you. So on this tubing, it's best to keep it relatively short, no more than 5 inches long at the most, because if it gets too long, it's too hard to manage the tube and get all of your material to come through. And so this one's, I don't know, maybe 4 or 5 inches long is all. But I'm going to take just a single strand of the crystal flash.
That's Midge flash.
Yeah. And then the very center of these tubes are hollow. I don't know if it'll even show up on the camera or not. But to start it in, you just take the crystal flash and get it started just in the very center of the tube. So you can see it's kind of centered in. And then I'll hold the tubing with my left hand and just take my right hand and just spin my fingers. And it corkscrews that crystal flash right up the center of the tube.
Can you suck it in?
You might be able to.
I've never tried it doing it that way. I just take it and throw it through. When I do this with like embroidery floss for some of my other patterns, I'll do it the same way, but I'll take some old like 2-pound tippet material and form a loop with it and push that through the tubing. But when I do my loop, I'll put the 2 tag ends in and hold those in my left hand and take the actual tube and spin it to work it up the tippet. And then I'll leave just a little bit of a loop on the end and take 1 or 2 strands of floss, put it through that loop and grab that tip and just pull it right through the tubing.
You say the name one more time?
This one is the
I
Daniels.
think this is the
The acetate floss is that red strand of floss that's right through the middle.
the red strand.
Uh-huh. And then in the bottom of the packet, there should be a little partial piece of glow-in-the-dark Flashaboo, which we'll use that for the ribbing, and there's a single black wire in your packet also that we'll use for ribbing.
Those are all taped together, right?
The three that are taped together are for the prints. There's just a single black one that's
Okay, I see.
kicking around in there.
I see.
Okay. All right, so this one, we're going to use the size 10 curved scud and with the white bead
Red.
and red thread. I use 70 denier UTC. Yep, that's bead there. Then I start my thread right behind the bead and take the crystal flash and tie that on right on top, right behind the bead. I just hold that right on top of the hook, and I wrap this down to about halfway down the bend, so that way the tails kind of hanging below the hook, so to speak. So right about there, right about the bend, and then just loose wrap back up to the front, because this is where we'll tie in the rest of our materials. And I usually go ahead and cut my flash now. And I like my tails on this to be about as long as a hook gap is wide. So on my vise here, I know if I just come right off the back of the nub here on my Renzetti and just cut it, that's about the perfect length every time. And another thing I like to do is whenever I'm using crystal flash and tying multiple flies, I'll stick my strands in a pair of hackle pliers and just hang them on my vise. Then I can just run the flash up and tie it right on the hook again, so I'm not digging for all my pieces everywhere. So we're gonna do some acetate floss next. And in case you guys haven't ever used this or heard of it, it's made by Danville's. It comes 10 yards in a spool, and I'll get a couple hundred flies out of one spool. They're, depending on where you get them from, they're about $3 to $5 a spool. But you take this and dip it in acetone, and it'll melt and harden on the body. And it's the only floss that you can take and dip in acetone and it'll actually melt it. You take any other of your like rayon floss or any of the other multi-strands, all it does is suck up the acetone and then discolors it. It doesn't do anything. So when I tie a lot of them, I like to take mine and put it on a bobbin, so that way I can maintain my thread control a little better. And I just kind of moisten it a little bit. And I'll tie that down right on top as well. And then I'll take a single strand of black wire, and then in your packets there'll be a little strand of glow-in-the-dark Flashaboo also. And then the Flashaboo, when you buy it, it's got these two little pieces of, I don't know if it's mono or what it is, that's wrapped around the flash. And I just take that and peel it right off because it doesn't serve any purpose. So I tied the floss in right on top of the fly, and my two rib materials, I'm going to tie them in side by side, and I just tuck them into the bead and tie them along the near side of the hook. And both of these rib materials you're going to tie together at the same time up the fly. snip everything back and stop at about the same spot that I stopped that flash. And then bring it all right back to the front again. And then I kind of hold the rib material out of the way a little bit. And I'll take one full turn with my floss behind the rib material. And then I kind of go right back up into the front of it and just start wrapping it forward. And I kind of hold it up to an angle and keep it tight. And then you just wrap it all the way up the body. Then I stop that one right behind the bead here. And just tie it off. Now we'll take that and just cut the floss. And then I'll take the flash boot and the wire, and I'll hold them together and keep them tight. And then just wrap them together at the same time, and you're just going to barber pole it right up the fly. So you got about 3 or 4 segmentations before you hit the thorax. And it really doesn't matter on this one if the wire's in front or if the flash boot behind it or vice versa. It's just kind of a two-tone effect for the ribbing. I do the same fly in a chartreuse green that works really good, but if I put the flashaboo, for whatever reason, I don't get as many fish on that as I do if I do just black wire. And I don't know if it's just the way the color reacts to the body or what it is, but this is my most effective color and size. And so for the thorax, we're just going to take a couple strips or a couple pieces of peacock curl and just tie that in right behind the bead and just do 4 or 5 turns of peacock. And then I'll just take it and just whip finish it. I'll be ready to go to dip. So the acetone I use for this, this is stuff you can buy at the hardware store, just the normal steel can. I've tried doing it with the acetone that you can get for, like the women use for their nail polish and stuff, and it's not a strong enough acetone. So I'll just take this, and one of these cans is about $15 or $20, and I've had this can for over 2 years, and I've still got acetone in it because I just don't use much out of it at all. So I'll take that and pour just a little bit of it into a baby food jar, and I only need maybe 1/4 inch to 1/2 inch of acetone on the bottom of the jar is all. It doesn't take much. So then I'll take that fly now. There's my hook, hackle pliers. And then I'll take it and put it either in some hackle pliers or some hemostats. And I just grab it right by the eye. And then I'll take that baby food jar and I'll kind of tilt it towards me so all the acetone's toward me, and I'll just take that fly and dip it in there. It only takes about 5 seconds at the most, just long enough for that acetone to permeate in. You just pull it out and I just kind of shake it a little bit to get the excess off, and then just let it air dry.